Valerie Gerstein. I'm a member of the board. I'm the vice chair of the Gabriel Project Mumbai board in the United States. We're here together with people from America, from Israel, from India, and as we saw in the chat, from all around the world. So we really are so appreciative that you've all come together today to hear updates about the work that we're doing in India during COVID. You're going to hear stories about the work we do, firsthand accounts about families who are affected. We're going to talk about our education, employment, healthcare, culture, community, and more. In this panel, you're going to hear from experts in the fields, and you're going to hear their passion. And it's my honor to thank each of you personally for being there on the ground, for being extensions of our hands, our hearts, our philanthropic dollars to really save lives. I think about the work you do all the time. I'm here in New York City, and I'm really proud that my family gets to be a part of what you're doing. And I'm super excited to have Jacob in my life, to know you. I met you on my 2017 National Young Leadership Cabinet mission to India. You were one of the first people that they put in front of us as a group of young leaders wanting to save the world. And my life has never been the same since I met you. When you shared the story about how in 2011, you went as a high-tech businessman to India, to Mumbai, and you saw the slums and you saw the people across the street who did not have the same kinds of necessities as others who you were doing business with. You went back to Israel and you decided to start this organization. And I'm in awe of you and the work that you do. And I'm excited to hear today about what you have to share with us this many years out. Thank you, Jacob. Here you go.
Thank you. Okay, 1 second, please. Okay. So I'd like to start off by also thanking the panelists, thanking Valerie. Thank you to all the people who have chosen to spend this time with us and to find out more about the communities where we work and how they're being affected by COVID-19. I'm going to briefly talk about how the pandemic and its consequent lockdowns has impacted India in general since the beginning of 2020. And where India is now, this is a snapshot. It's just a little bit of a summary for you all who are outside of India to understand what the Indian COVID-19 experience is. It all started with the outbreak of COVID-19 in late January 2020, when 3 Indian students traveled in the southern state of Kerala from Wuhan, China, which was the epicenter of the outbreak, and they all 3 tested with COVID-19. At the same time, several other cases were detected in other parts of the country, most of which were linked to people who traveled to affected countries. On March 24th, 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ordered a nationwide lockdown for 21 days. And this was only after 500 cases were discovered in India. 1.3 billion people had 4 hours to prepare for a 3-week total lockdown. Pandemonium erupted. Especially hard hit were internal migrant workers in the informal sector. These are the people who live in the slums. On the 14th of April, the government of India extended the nationwide lockdown till the 3rd of May. And then again, by 2 weeks to May 17th. And again, 2 more times till May 30th. On the 30th of May, the lockdown would be further extended till the 30th of June, but this time in containment zones. Certain areas were provided with limited services, obviously not to vulnerable communities. Since June 30th till today, there have been a series of easing and restrictions, okay? Easing of restrictions called unlocks, and then reinstating restrictions depending on the virus spread. COVID-19 infections increased rapidly since March, with a significant growth in testing. But India has one of the lowest testing rates for the virus in the world compared to other countries, despite recently ramping up in recent months. India's healthcare workers and public officials were vigilant in their fight against the virus, but despite that, the country's healthcare infrastructure had a very hard time coping. Data shows that India has less than half a hospital bed per 1,000 people. That's the 40th in the world, in comparison to China, that has almost 4 beds per 1,000. When you're talking about 1.3 billion people, that's a lot of beds missing. Moreover, the country's population density is one of the highest in the world, making it harder to contain local transmissions if strict precaution measures are not followed. A lacking healthcare infrastructure also remains a major cause for concern. This was because of an inadequate public system, leading to shifting the weight to the private sector. And the private sector was not prepared for an emergency of this magnitude. An increase in daily cases and a rising death count put India ahead with the fastest infection rate worldwide in August 2020. Saying that, the government did mention that there are recoveries, and recoveries were significantly higher than the number of active cases. Some context. Here you see indeed that the death rates of people with COVID-19 is lower in India compared to other countries in the developing world. 3% compared to the US of 6%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it translates to the difference of tens of thousands of deaths, thankfully not being seen in India. Also, Maharashtra, which is the state where Mumbai is located and where we work, is the state with the largest COVID-19 caseload of all 35 states of India. This is probably because Mumbai is the commercial capital of India, with residents taking a lot of foreign travel before the pandemic set in. Or it's very congested and the population density is extremely high, especially in under-resourced communities like the slums that we work in. Even though the infection and death rates are lower than the US, we need to understand that the population of India is 4 times as big as the US. Some reasons for the lower infection rate, infection and death rates are, number one, the pandemic started later in India, first in the US and then much later in India, at least at its full force. We may see, and hopefully not, that India might be catching up to the US. Again, hopefully not. Underreporting of cases in death and infections is another cause for this low rate. Just note that in a test done recently in the slums, when they're comparing the infection rate between people living in the slums and people living outside of the slums in India, the comparison showed that they found that 15% of people outside the slums, 15% of people outside the slums had the COVID-19 antibody, while 50% of the people in the slums had it. The question is, do people living in the slums have had COVID-19, but are simply not tested or underreported? And the third reason is, to India's credit, a nationwide mandate to adhere to wearing masks and other COVID-19 spread precautions. I think we could all learn from India in that regard. Two major impacts of the pandemic and lockdown is the closing of schools from April till today, and the devastating unemployment that was almost at 25% during April and May. No one knows the fallout of an entire generation of children, especially from vulnerable communities, who have lost out on almost a year of proper education. All these facts point to a country that has been immensely challenged by the health, social, and economic stress brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. What happens now, with the hope of a vaccine and the volatility of the spread rate, remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you for the overview of what's going on in India and specifically in the region where the Gabriel Project Mumbai does its work. With statistics and understanding the news as it's being reported, people may start to have questions about what we're doing and where we are in the world. So please use the Q&A feature on the Zoom chat. If you're on Facebook, you can always be in touch with someone at the Gabriel Project Mumbai. We can develop a relationship with you. Those of you on the Zoom, you can ask your questions now and we'll answer them at the end. For now, we're going to continue on with our amazing experts from the field, and they're going to share their experiences, their insights and information from our beneficiary communities in the slums and villages. So you're going to hear from Taiza Diaz. She's going to talk about solutions and plans and projects that address the vital needs in the community. Taiza has been working for us as an expert in India, and she has represented the Gabriel Project Mumbai in various webinars that are bringing people together from around the world, talking about best practices so that we can work in initiatives like this with vulnerable communities. And she's been working in this field for over a decade. She is an expert. What she has to say today will definitely stick with you for a very long time. I'm excited to hear about what you have to tell us about the COVID-19 issues in our work. Thank you, Taiza.
Thank you, Valerie. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to speak a little bit today about, we're going to take focus. So Jacob has already shared with us some interesting pointers and points about the COVID-19 situation in India in general. But I just want us to focus on drawing from our experience to focus on what communities have actually been going through. So I'm going to look at how COVID-19 has really affected vulnerable communities. And when I say vulnerable communities, I'm talking specifically about rural communities and also people from urban slums, so slum communities. Now, as Jacob very well
Taiza, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you, so we're going to pause just for a moment. Taiza's in India. As I joked before, even in my kitchen in New York City, I may not always have great internet access, but Taiza, let's go ahead and try again, please.
All right. Okay, is this better now? I hope I'm back on.
Yes.
Okay. So as Jacob very rightly spoke about the COVID-19 and how it impacted communities all over the world, what I'd like to focus on is its impact on vulnerable communities, which is specifically rural communities and urban slum communities. And although COVID-19 has affected everyone, it's affected them economically, it's affected people socially and psychologically, it's had a particularly hard-hitting effect on people from vulnerable communities. And this is because these people already struggled with living. They struggled with daily life. So you can imagine if someone's already going through a difficult time, how much more hard-hitting a pandemic like this would be for them. One of the main areas where they've had a serious challenge is a job loss. So Jacob's already mentioned about loss of jobs. If we look at what happened during COVID-19 and the very sudden lockdown, what we see is that a lot of people the middle class could very easily move into a work from home model, which means they could choose to stay at home and continue earning a living. But there was a significant portion of the population that did not have this option, which means they had to be physically present at work in order to earn. These are people who did not and still do not have job security, which means if they do not go to work, they do not earn for the day. So Jacob mentioned the unorganized sector. So the unorganized sector is basically the domestic workers, the manual laborers, the self-employed, the people in rural economies, the farmers. So these are people who live and who are part of the unorganized sector. And as you see, 93% of people work in the unorganized sector, and it is these people who also live in the slums. So very often, people from villages, so farmers, once the harvest season is over, once monsoons are over, they would move to the cities, start living in slums and working as construction workers, as masons, as domestic help, and they earn from day to day. So they literally have a hand-to-mouth existence. And more than 400 million people do not have the option of working from home. So while, yes, COVID-19 has affected everybody, for this particular section and segment of society, no work was equal to no pay. Now, I know that slum communities and rural communities have faced a whole host of issues, but the few issues that I'm going to focus on today is the ones that Gabriel Project has observed and has reached out to its own beneficiaries to assist them with. So yes, there are psychological issues with domestic violence, but I'm not going to be focusing on those today. I'm going to be focusing on the domino effect that the loss of jobs had for the people in slum communities as well as rural communities. And the obvious one was insufficient finances to manage household needs. So what happens is when someone lives from hand to mouth and they can no longer go to work, their very small reserves of money start depleting. When you don't have enough money every day, it means it's going to impact your household needs. You are not going to have enough money to buy groceries. You're not going to be able to pay the rent. So many of these people were forcibly evicted from their houses and their little shanties because they could not afford to pay the rent. And another very hard-hitting one was on the children, because we all spoke about online education, and it was such an exciting paradigm for the middle class children to go into, because now they could learn virtually, they could see videos. And while this was great, and it was a great initiative to move into online education as opposed to having nothing, we simultaneously had to ask ourselves, is this reaching all the children? Is it reaching children in the rural villages when there's no electricity, where there's no internet connection? Is it reaching slum children who don't have enough devices? So here you have families who have very little financial resources, cannot feed themselves. And we're asking these families to now invest in equipment, technology, so that their children can learn. It was not possible. It's absolutely not possible when it's these people who are thinking about just survival, feeding their families. So there are two aspects to the education. One is definitely the learning that is done, whether it's done online or it's done by a teacher. The second aspect is what in India is called the midday meal scheme. The midday meal is particularly designed to provide at least one nutritious meal to needy children when they come to school. This is to ensure that they're not hungry the whole day, because many of these children may be unable to have a meal at home before they come to school. It might be the only meal they get in the day. So the midday meal was very crucial in providing this little nutritional supplement, this little wholesome meal to these children. Lockdown meant no school. No school meant no education, but it also meant no meal for the children. Moving on to another issue that the poor have faced, it's in the area of social distancing. So social distancing has been a word that all of you have heard very, very often on news, when we speak to each other, at shops, when you go grocery shopping. But social distancing has been a particular challenge for the people in slum communities. The reason being, as Jacob rightly mentioned before, is that these are densely packed pockets, places where people are living in small 10 feet by 10 feet rooms. And when I say people, I'm talking about a family of sometimes 4 to 7 to 8 to 10 members living in this tiny room. So you can imagine how scary COVID-19 was for them, because here are people who are struggling without jobs, they're struggling with their basic needs, and they have a directive from the government who's saying you need to social distance. If they cannot achieve this, what do? It means that they are at risk of contracting COVID-19. And once they do contract COVID-19, they will have to be removed from the slums, removed to their homes, and sent to special facilities. This is not necessarily a bad thing, because in the facility, the government will possibly give them quite good services. It's just, we need to look at it from an emotional and a psychological point of view. Being removed from separated from your family, if it's a child or if it's an old person, being separated from your parents, from your near and dear ones, and totally being disconnected. So it has impacted them in various ways. And it's a fear that they have to continue to live with, because they don't have an option of staying separate from other family members, or even in home quarantine. The idea of home quarantine really doesn't exist for them. So what could these people do? So here they had no jobs, no education for their children, no food to eat, perhaps not even a house to live in, and increasing fear that they will never able to social distance if they do get COVID-19. So what options are left for these people? Move back to the villages. That's the best they could do. These are the homes that they came from in search of jobs, in search of a better livelihood and future for their children. So these people decided that if we can't manage back in these urban slums, let's go back home. Now you must understand that by the time they could decide to go back home, transportation was hit, which means they had no trains to travel. They would have to walk back home. And many of them had to travel almost 500 kilometers back to their hometown, and they did this by foot. So statistics show that 14 million people migrate from one state to another in search of work and basically a better life for them and their families. So with COVID and with the increasing pressure on them, the only option that they had was to go back home. With no transportation, it meant they had to walk back home. So yes, there were issues that they faced. They personally experienced this hardship in their daily life. But what I observed was that the connection between the middle class and the poor just didn't exist. There were many, many people who just ignored what these vulnerable communities were going through. For them, COVID-19 was a struggle to survive. For many middle class, COVID-19 was just a situation that meant you watched more Netflix every day, and that you couldn't go out to party, or you couldn't go interact with your friends. And that was the sad part. The sad part is so much of India and so much of our communities, we just happened to ignore what was happening to the larger public. And I think that's where we needed to bring people together and say, you know what, whatever's happening, when we say we're in it together, we need to be more empathetic, and we need to feel for these people and reach out in service. So we talk about social distancing from the point of view of keeping us safe from COVID-19, but the poor have really been socially distanced from a lot of facilities. They've been socially distanced from their jobs. They've been socially distanced from transport, socially distanced from food, socially distanced from good health services. And I think as government entities as well as NGOs, it was our responsibility and our duty to these people and our duty to our fellow countrymen to step in and do something about it, to step in and provide relief, to really show them that we care as a community, we care for you, and we're going to do something no matter what. Thank you.
Taiza, thank you. I want to very publicly thank you for being a strong female role model. Before COVID, the Gabriel Project Mumbai focused on women's empowerment, focused on the Masala mamas cooking for these children, because if they went to school, they ate. And you showed that moms like me, who that cartoon, that image of what's for dinner tonight shows about some sensitivity that we need in the world. And I have the Masala Mama cookbook behind me. It is a cookbook our family loves, especially the mango lassi recipe. I hope that you all will go to the Gabriel Project Mumbai website and learn more about women's empowerment programs and the sort of scenarios that Taiza spoke about. Now I'm very privileged and honored to introduce Hemant Pawar. He is our on the ground eyewitness expert also. Thank you for being with us today. We really look forward to hearing the personal stories that reflect what Taiza was sharing with us. Go.
Namaste and hello everyone. Yeah, I'm very humbled to present the real stories of the lockdown in India to such a kind, sensitive audience. I can see everybody now. And I thank Jacob and GPM for this opportunity. Yeah, that's it. Yes, so working with GPM gives me opportunity to closely interact with migrant laborer community in the slums of Karwa. These are some photographs I'll be showing of the people actually I met and I know how they live. So as being there on the field in those slums, I feel deeply moved by the aftermaths of the lockdown. Now I will narrate some 2, 3 such cases here. I'll tell you a story on a case you can say of Anjan Shukla. I met Anjan Shukla on a small lane of Bhaskar Nagar. Bhaskar Nagar is another small area in slums of Kalwa. And you can say he is an apt example of how many years of labor alone even can't assure him a decent and worry-free living in a city like Mumbai. He came to Mumbai almost 15 years back, and with a family of kids and wife to support, with the job of a watchman, he was barely keeping them going. And suddenly, everything came to halt when the lockdown was declared. And in the lockdown, he lost his job as the shop he was working for was shut down. And slowly, his meager saving dwindled in the lockdown. And now GPM has helped many such families in lockdown with distribution of grocery kits. Another big family of Shivram can't even think of migrating to their native place. As transporter, they were traveling in whatever mode they can find when there were people manipulating this situation, and they were charging like 3,500, which is nearly $50 per person. So he can't afford it at all. Absolutely impossible for him. So Shivratan would sell sweets. What he was doing, he was selling sweets, chocolates, in local train, the suburban trains of Mumbai. Now there are no trains running in the lockdown for common people. They even can't maintain physical distancing. I won't say social distancing, physical distancing. In the small, cramped room of 120 square foot, that is the average area of a room you can find in the slums. Some are very small, even smaller than 120 square feet, where 7 or 8 members of family live. Shivam Gupta even fears that his small children, his kids might contract virus. He used to run a small food stall. Every migrant laborer faces the same fate with no saving at all for any calamity or even emergency, any kind of emergency. Forget the pandemic. Pandemic is something, a calamity, which is a emergency for the whole world. So, so it is absolutely difficult for them, anybody, to live in this costly city of Mumbai. These are the families, yeah, and where this is very, very sad. One day, actually, during a peak of the lockdown, I was driving on Mumbai-Agra road. Agra is a northern part of India. And as I came out of Thane city and I was on the highway, I saw thousands of laborers, thousands literally, bundled and crumpled, cramped in hundreds of odd transport trucks heading towards the northern part, some going to UP, Uttar Pradesh, some going to MP, or some going to Bihar. And they were traveling, I think absolutely I could see every possible mean of travel on that day. Some were traveling in huge trailers. You can see in the photo. This is actually somewhat smaller truck. I have seen huge trailers and with no ventilation, no space. That was quite horrible. And some in very small trucks, some in rickshaws, the tuk-tuks, trying to reach the distance of 500, 600 kilometers in a rickshaw. Just imagine that. And I saw the most heart-wrenching was when I saw a family of 4 traveling on a scooter. Like the boy, he was huddled on the footboard of the scooter with his father riding the scooter, the wife and another small kid, small daughter, I think, with all small bags hanging outside the scooter. Means I still feel very sad. I could only pray for the safety of the family. That's all I could do. Some even I saw were traveling on bicycle. One single person traveling on a cycle trying to reach UP or Agra. I still remember everything vividly and it sinks my heart deep in pain. This actually I've seen everything with my own eyes. That was very sad. Thanks for letting me to share this experience.
Thank you, Hemant. You truly are our eyes and ears on the ground. We rely on you. We thank you. You are helping us to do this important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to introduce Shosh Balk now. I remember when my daughter was getting ready to start middle school at the Heschel School in New York City, I heard about this teacher who had volunteered in India with the Gabriel Project Mumbai. And then Shosh ended up being my daughter's teacher and then prepared her for her bat mitzvah. I'm a huge fan of her as a person, and I think the depth of what she experienced at the Gabriel Project Mumbai made me love her even more. So Shosh, I'm so happy that you're going to be here to talk about your experience as a volunteer. And because you're an expert and such a beloved and talented teacher in New York, I'm very curious for you to share what your thoughts are about education during COVID in India. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and thank you, Jacob, for having me here today. Hi, everyone. My name is Shosh. For the past 8.5 years, I've been teaching in the Jewish day school private sector in New York City, but certainly one of my most special and memorable teaching experiences took place with the Gabriel Project in Mumbai. If you can see my virtual background here, I'll mostly be talking about my fourth graders today, but these are some of the older students with whom I had the privilege to work in Calva, really, really special. And we'll share a few more photos in a moment. So earlier this month, UNICEF named the children affected by the COVID-19 crisis the lost generation. And while thankfully the COVID-19 virus, as we know, has less of a direct impact on the health of children as compared to adults, nevertheless, 90% of children around the world are being affected by school closures in 2020. And while most of the children that all of us know personally will have access to hybrid or virtual schooling, in some cases homeschooling, I know that my students who I taught in Calva will not have these same opportunities. And as a result, the educational gap that GPM has been fighting to narrow is instead continuing to widen during these difficult times. I'll just share my screen for a moment to show you an image of some of those students. Okay. So these are my fourth grade students from Calva. They're holding up flags that they decorated during the learning of a geography unit. And there's so much I could say about these kids, but if there's one thing I could boil it down to, these students understand more than any other I've taught that learning is truly a gift. They eagerly await their teachers each day. They jump up to greet them, and they truly can't wait to learn. And while reading, writing, and immersive educational experiences are a core part of their day at school, this is also an environment where their social emotional needs are met and where creativity comes out. And in the case of the Gabriel Project, it's also a place where their physical well-being is looked after in programs such as the school lunch that is provided, for the fact that there happens to be a medical clinic below the school where many of them are treated, and so on. So I want to just share a couple of my most memorable experiences in Calva as I've been thinking about this COVID-19 crisis. Just as a small side note, I found this image when we collaborated with the soap factory that the Gabriel Project has there to teach about health and hygiene, which was a very important lesson here at the time, teach about hand washing properly. Little did I know I'd be replicating this exact lesson in the year of COVID-19 with my American students. So topics that we were thinking about here then, and we're all thinking about them now. But something that really, really stood out in my mind, and this image is actually from working with students in Ashte, which I know Valerie has a special connection with. We also spent some time working with these students as well. And both in Ashte and Calva, I had a really stunning experience where the same situation actually played out. We were doing a lesson where a worksheet was handed out to the children, and there was a question at the top of the page, a very, to me as an American teacher, a basic question asking, what makes you special? And the children needed to write a basic sentence in English, what makes them special, and fill in a picture illustrating what that would look like. And we noticed as the teachers that the children were having a very hard time responding to the prompt. We couldn't quite understand why. We did have a translator in the room who was working with us. And our translator, Haley, said, we can't really translate this sentence exactly. We don't really have language for that to say, we don't have a word of what makes you special in the way you would say in the United States. That's not really, a value that these students focus on. They don't have the time and the space and the luxury to think about that. They are growing up to work hard and for their families to, show them how to contribute to the community. And we were quite stunned, and we paused class. We had everybody look at the lines on their hands and just pause and think and compare, and notice that no two children in the class had the same line pattern on their hands. And they were just fascinated by that and comparing and looking around. And I realized in that moment, it's truly a luxury. It's truly something extra to be able to take the time and space to think about what makes you individual, what makes you unique. And the Gabriel Project in these school systems really provides that space for these children. And I know that that's something that they're also not having access to right now, is that exploration of self. Another story that stood out for me didn't have to do with the children, but actually with the teachers in the classroom. So this is an image of my co-teachers in the fourth grade classroom. The one on the left is actually, I'm watching her get married on Zoom in a few hours. And the one right in the middle is the Indian teacher who was assigned to our classroom. Her name is Neelam, and we just adored her as well. And something really unexpected happened with Nilam that was really special on the last day of the program. She was relatively reserved, sort of observing throughout the program. And on the last day of school, she came up to me and she said, through our translator, Haley, she expressed that she had been watching us closely this entire time. And she shared that in the afternoons, she actually went and was a teacher in the I guess, the public school system in Colville, working with other students. And she said, I never knew that learning could be so sensory based, so immersive, and frankly, so fun. And I've been imitating everything you've been doing here, and I've been teaching it over to these other students as well. That was really powerful for us. And I think it's one that speaks volumes about GPM's widespread impact on those communities and what we can accomplish with these cross-cultural experiences and working together, something also that we don't have access to right now, but we can imagine just what impact this has. So thank you, Valerie and Jacob, so much for having me today.
Thank you, Shosh. There's so many people watching and chiming in and writing to us personally, and you have a fan club, I think, and a lot of people appreciating your message, your vision, your hopes for education, your experiences, and I do want to acknowledge that there are so many people who are on this call today who have volunteered themselves in the Kalva slums, in the Ashtay village. And we hope one day our family to go to Ashtay. Shosh alluded to the fact that we have a special connection. My daughter Liza has a pen pal there, Monica, and many of our friends who are watching the call now have heard about Monica over the years. Through COVID, Liza, excuse me, Liza and Monica have been able to be with each other through Zoom to connect from a distance and share their life and their stories from afar. Jacob is the founder of the Gabriel Project Mumbai. Kenneth is the leader of the Gabriel Project Mumbai in India. He is the one that oversees all the various programs. And Kenneth, we cannot wait to hear from you about all of the passionate work that you do, that your team does. Please tell the whole team that we appreciate all their efforts. And we look forward to hearing all the things you're doing to help the communities thrive before COVID, during COVID, and the plans for after COVID. Thank you, Kenneth.
A big namaste and a warm welcome to everybody from Gabriel Project Mumbai, India. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Jacob, for giving us this opportunity to share our story. I represent the voice of not only our staff and management, but also hopefully and honestly, the voice of the people who we serve in India. I want to pull a little bit into the pre-COVID time when we started operating on our own in India. As we made assessments of the need in the Kalva low resource communities and not slums, we understood that we would have to adopt a two-track plan for our work: humanitarian services and development projects to attain our vision. As we started, we realized that women would be a great enabling force in our work, and that women would be the key players in our projects and programs, in management, staff, and also beneficiaries. I want to pause a little bit to speak about the photos here, which to any city dweller in India is a common sight as you drive out into the countrysides of India. The daily stock of water for a home being drawn from nearby wells, rivers, or mountain springs to keep the family going. Women walking and balancing a heavy load of water, morning and evening, sometimes trudging up and down hill slopes. Strong, unrelenting, committed, and faithful to the need of their families. Rain or sunshine, it is their sheer determination and hard work that we recognize as a force of change, a catalyst for change that we at GPM honor and salute, as they represent a high majority of our management and staff in India. At GPM, we very early recognized that the needs for vulnerable children and communities could be addressed through our 4 verticals of education, nutrition, healthcare, and micro-enterprises for community development. We identified our beneficiaries as vulnerable children, women, and communities. and that we would address both sides of the problem. Urban low-resource areas that had to take in an unending stream of migrants from the rural areas of India looking for work, and then also the other side, which is a typical rural area from where people were migrating to the city in search of work. We created programs in education, healthcare, nutrition, enterprises to carry forward our mission goals. Staff and management understood our 4 verticals of operations and this was up March this year when COVID hit us. We at GPM actually went into lockdown a week earlier than the official government date, and that helped us make arrangements to start work from home and set up all the technical arrangements of Wi-Fis and laptops for all our staff. It took us about 2 to 3 days to make an assessment of the COVID situation, something totally new to us as an NGO, and to see what we could do to go back to our children, our women, and the communities. We knew we had our internal capacities, our resources, and most importantly, our will to do something. And so we quickly designed 2 new programs as we hit the ground running on a COVID lockdown mitigation plan. And coronavirus emergency response and FED, meaning food emergency distribution. As we started, we began to hear stories of heroic efforts of our doctors and nurses and support staff in hospitals, and also the police force on the streets enforcing the lockdown. This was also identified as a beneficiary group, and we at GPM felt that as we had good relationships with the government in all of our programs, we should also address the needs of the hospitals and the police force. In cover, I'd just like to elaborate a little bit. We realized that we had a lot of internal resources that we could use within this program. For example, soap making and mask stitching. With the result, we were able to distribute over 25,000 bars of soap along with a set of posters and banners that explain the effective ways of hand washing. We must also mention a leading corporate in Mumbai, Godrej, who donated over 23,000 soap bars. Our women at the micro enterprise vertical Tribal Threads India were able to stitch over 17,000 cloth masks that were distributed in hospitals, within communities, with other non-profits, and about 6,000 was donated to the police force of the Palghar district. We also built hand washing stations in 4 of the district hospitals in spite of the lockdown, when it was near impossible to travel, to procure materials, and to get the labor to do this work. Very often, it was our GPM staff in the villages who ventured out to get this work done. In FED, for our low resource area of Kalba, and also in the villages of Ashti and Mokhada, we started out with surveys to find out families who were the hardest hit. Families with handicapped persons, widows, orphans. And they were the ones who were chosen, and they were the ones who were given first preference. Through our internal systems, we put a lot of effort to ensure that people got the best quality of food supplies and the right quantity based on the number of people in their families. In Mokhada, we were early movers, and I was told that GPM within a week was able to respond with supplies to thousands of people within the first round. Not to boast or take undue credit, but several NGOs have been working in the area for over 10 or 15 years, but GPM, with only a 6-month presence there in Mokhada, was able to activate its local staff to move trucks in to distribute rations to these villagers. This credit goes to our office team and the local leaders in Mokhada who responded so willingly and so quickly. A special mention must be made of GPM's efforts to supply daily fresh cooked meals to doctors and nurses, and the support staff at the Palghar District COVID Hospital for over 4 months. Lunches and dinners were served to all the staff who had come to work at this hospital. This would be approximately over 5,000 meals that were served there. I want to also dwell a little bit upon a situation that happened in Mokhada in a village called Dolara. And here we heard the story of about 50 people, a group of 5 or 6 families who were migrants returning home from Mumbai, who walked overnight, trudging 100 long kilometers in the night and coming back to their village. And then they were told that they couldn't come back to their homes and were quarantined in the village school that they had to stay in. And I must say that GPM very quickly on the first day itself was able to supply them not only with rations and food supplies, but also cleaning supplies, toothpaste, all the hygiene products that they needed to make their stay comfortable for the 14-day quarantine period in Dolara. So now as we get out of this lockdown period, while we are still in COVID, we look back to the learning that we can get from our pre-COVID and our COVID response. And there were several things that we learned. One of which is we learned that our staff in India could be dynamic and responsive to the pivot and to the change. We had a little bit of challenges in the early days with, the technical issues of communication and technology and coordination. But we learned that we could be a tight and resilient team for better challenges ahead. The second learning is that we got deeper insights into the challenges that the rural communities face in Mokhada. We learned of the issue of malnutrition in Mokhada. And from this learning, we took back to our office and to our teams and to Gabriel Project Mumbai to design a new program called Bal Balawan Mission, which will address the problem of malnutrition in Mokhada among the children there. Another learning that we had was that we revalidated our original strategy of the 4 verticals, because we found that the 4 verticals of education in running the awareness camps and the awareness campaigns, and the other verticals of healthcare, nutrition, and micro enterprises could all be used as an effective and holistic comprehensive solution for development, especially within the rural landscape of Mokhada. And finally, we realized that this reinforces our commitment to power on with our vision project in Mokhada, leveraging the same 4 verticals, but with a deeper focus on larger development goals. For example, our education could become a school for learning for the Adivasi children. Our healthcare could become a hospital. The nutrition could expand into agriculture and the malnutrition problem. And micro enterprises finally giving people economic power and livelihood to raise their standard of living and to ultimately bring about development for the people of Mokhada in Palghar, and also for the state of Maharashtra and India, so that we can bring to reality the vision of Gabriel Project, that is transforming rural India for a better India. So once again, I'd like to reiterate the final vision through these 4 verticals, the transforming of rural India for a better India. Thank you. Namaste. Jai Hind. Jai Maharashtra.
I think that we're going to move to the questions and answers. And so, Jacob, we have a volunteer from December 2019, someone who was in India volunteering with the Gabriel Project Mumbai. It's a beautiful question. From my understanding, before COVID, GPM strived to help the people of these struggling communities through a number of streams, while also promoting self-sustainability within these communities. How does the long-term goal of self-sustainability shift with the onset of the pandemic as more families are desperately relying on the aid that GPM is providing?
Okay, so this actually would be addressed by Kenneth in his presentation, but it's a fantastic question. I see, Josh, thank you for asking that. And it's a very important question because that is a big challenge. How do you balance the immediate needs of COVID-19 with the long-term goals, because we don't know how long COVID-19 is going to last. So it's really very important to balance that well. I mean, the truth is that when people are sitting in their homes with no food to eat, the immediate thing for us to do is to provide them with groceries, and we've given over 3,000 families since the beginning of COVID-19. We've given them food security, which is a very important thing. It's the most important thing at the moment. But for long-term goals, this is where Kenneth really excelled, and our staff excelled, is that we saw opportunities to do economic empowerment for those people who are, the migrant workers, like Taiza was talking about, those people who are struggling financially, and to use it as a strength. And so we started a women's economic empowerment program called Tribal Threads. It's a sewing collective where women got together and through our direction and how to stitch certain items, we were able to train. And now I think we're about 17 women are part of this program, where we give them a sewing machine. For those places where they have electricity, we give an electric one, and for those who don't have electricity, a manual sewing machine. And they start to sew orders of things very much needed, which is the cloth face masks. And suddenly there was a great demand, obviously, with COVID-19, and we've produced more than 30,000 face masks up to date. And we've even given 3,000 of them to the local police force in one district. And this was really important. The women received economic empowerment. They're able now to go ahead and purchase some food. They don't need our groceries to give out. So there's a long-term solution. We've also provided them with other kind of sewing jobs, like cloth bags that are used in supermarkets and others. We've got now, Kenneth and his team have got orders that's going to give them a self-sufficient approach to their economic health. And that also we see with our education. In our education, we're not allowed to open up our classes inside buildings. And so again, the educational staff, especially in the villages and also in the slums, decided we're going to start education classes in the villages, but outside, in open areas. And this is going quite well, especially when you have children who are lacking or have stopped their foundational learning. And here we're able to go and maintain the foundational learning until the point in time when they can go back to their regular classes with the government classes.
We have a few minutes left. I think for us to properly hear Kenneth's wise voice, your important voice to us, we're going to record you giving the full presentation. We'll make it available through social media, maybe attach it to an email. We would love to be in touch with everybody after this call. Kenneth, you deserve that time and space to do it properly, so we will definitely be following up with that. I want to just bring together, thank you. You're amazing. I want to just bring a few of the questions to the table. I really appreciate all the questions that have been coming in. People are asking about the children, and they're asking about the photographs that we're seeing, and they're asking about then versus now. And so if you could talk about the women who may not be wearing masks in the pictures, I believe that those pictures are pre-COVID photos that people saw. But if, Taiza, let's go. Hemant, can you speak about the women and if they're working safely by each other? And then Kenneth, Kenneth, now I see you back. Can you speak first about the children, their education, and what food they are getting right now during COVID?
Yes, what we did was in Ashte, for example, we got permission from the village council, which is known as the Gram Panchayat in India, because the education authorities were not ready to give us permission to operate in the school buildings. So all our teachers agreed to work in the villages and in, you know, people's homes, on the community centers. And teaching is going on, and it is carrying on for all the tribal children in our schools in Ashte. And yes, they've been coming, we've been supporting them, and so it continues. So I'm very happy to report that the education for the tribal children has been going on. Whereas in the slums, it is very difficult to get children in those closed spaces. It could be dangerous. I mean, we've got to keep the COVID situation in mind, and in the low resource areas, there could be a problem. And so we acceded to the request of the police not to start the classes as of now.
Thank you for that. We have a very diverse group of people listening in. We have teachers, educators, volunteers, parents, students, college gap year grads, and also entrepreneurs. And so one entrepreneur said, while each of the 4 verticals are an enormous project in themselves, what type of partnerships have you made in the micro enterprise space? And what would be your best case type of partnership in that space, Jacob? You're on mute.
I think Kenneth can better answer these questions when it comes to partnerships. Go ahead, Kenneth.
So for partnerships, it's always you know, beneficial when because we can't do things on our own as an NGO. So for example, we have a project called Jal Jeevan Hai, which is the clean drinking water project in the low resource area of the suburban Mumbai. And we have a partnership with the leading corporate, a leading company for water filtration in India. Some of you might have heard of Eureka Forbes. And it was a beautiful partnership wherein they provided the whole infrastructure and the equipment, and we empowered one of our women entrepreneurs to take it up as a small micro enterprise. And she has been running it for the past 2 or 3 years, giving people in the low resource area water at the cost of 1/5 or 1/10 sometimes of the cost there. So it has been a very, very effective and efficient partnership, having a corporate and an NGO and a woman entrepreneur coming together to drive forward something that is so meaningful and so beneficial for the community there. The second partnership is something that we've just started with this year with the Federation of the Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry Mumbai, which is known as the FICCI Flow, and the women entrepreneurs of Mumbai who come under the FICCI Flow banner. And they've come together to fund the kitchen that is now going to prepare food for the malnourished children in Palghar, in Mokhada especially. So that is going to be another very enabling partnership that has just started out. And I'm very sure that it's going to reap a lot of benefit, not only for the NGO, not only for FICCI and the entrepreneurs, but also for the children and for the communities in Mokhada. So we do have examples of partnerships that are very enabling. And another very important partner I'd like to end is to partner with the government. For example, we have been partnering with the government on our education programs where we work within the school system. Now for the malnutrition project, we're going to be partnering with the Integrated Child Development Services, or as it's known as ICDS in India. We will be closely partnering with their teams, with their ground staff, and with the infrastructure to develop a new program that is about to start for malnutrition in India, in Mokhada. And I want to tell you all, the title of the project is going to be Bal Balwan Mission, which is a healthy child. And we are very excited about this new project.
Thank you, Kenneth. And as Taiza joins you, I hope that everybody will leave this call with the knowledge that we have experts in India who work together as a very strong team. They are empowering families, the children, the women, everybody in their family. They live in multi-generational homes. in the villages, and as you saw some of the photos, in very close quarters in Mumbai, in the tribal communities. So I want to thank you all for spending your time with us, for asking so many questions. There were many more questions in the chat that we would love to follow up with each of you about. Some people want to know when they can volunteer. It's not yet. We will definitely be in touch with you of when you can volunteer. Another person wrote in to say, what we have learned is how to make sure we utilize technology to continue to educate and help the community and to connect with other communities that can offer support. So please know that we are an organization that loves to help the most vulnerable people. And it's really, Jacob, a thanks to your vision and all of the people, all the lives of those who you've touched, and you've given us the opportunity to travel to India virtually or in person to make a difference alongside you. Thank you all for your time and your expertise and your compassion. Namaste.
Thank you.